Good afternoon, everyone. Call to order this meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for Thursday, the 13th of July, 2023. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district, and today we are located on the Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwépemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc and respects the territory and land on which we gather today. We have the chair's announcements, and I'm going to immediately hand over to CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden, and good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to just start with a couple announcements, if I could. As you're all aware, we have recently posted and recently filled the position of our External Relations and Advocacy Advisor. The strategic addition to our team reflects our commitment to fostering strong relationships with our First Nation partners, other levels of government, and key stakeholders. This important position will be responsible for cultivating and nurturing relationships, all while promoting our organization's interests and priorities. I believe that effective external relationships and advocacy are instrumental in driving growth and positive change in our region. This announcement underscores our commitment to maintaining strong connections with our First Nation partners and all levels of government as we navigate challenges and opportunities ahead. So with that being said, I would like to now introduce Corbin Kelly. Corbin's right back here as our new external advisor. With his knowledge and experience in working with First Nations, provincial and local government, along with his key relationships, Corbin will be a great fit within our team, and we're excited to have him join the organization. He'll be reporting directly to myself, and we'll be meeting soon to kind of set out that strategy moving forward. But if you could, please extend a warm welcome to Corbin as he'll be starting Monday with the TNRD. All right, I've got one more announcement, if I could. I would also like to take a moment, even if she doesn't want me to, and acknowledge an important retirement that's happening this week. In fact, tomorrow. Friday is the day that our good friend and colleague, Miss Regina Sedilkova, will be riding off into the sunset and starting her well-deserved retirement. Regina started with the organization in July of 2011 and spent the last 12 years in our Development Services Department. I know Regina is looking forward to some exciting upcoming family travel plans and spending time refining some of her many hobbies and amazing talents. Regina has played a critical role in the growth of our region and provided some outstanding leadership over the years to the TNRD and our team. You can always count on Regina for her knowledge and wisdom, her vast experience, her wicked sense of humor, and she'll always speak her mind. You're certainly one of a kind, and I'm very proud to have had you on our team. And you'll be greatly missed. So congratulations on your retirement. Thank you, Chair Roden.
Well, welcome to Corbin and farewell to Regina. It's been a pleasure working with you over the last 12 years, and I will remember you offering to accompany me on walks in Ashcroft with your 120-pound dog who should scare off the bears. So the chair's announcements, we have an update from the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library, which is pleased to announce that it will be holding Fire Smart information sessions at community libraries outside Kamloops. These sessions, run by the TNRD Fire Smart Coordinator, are designed to educate residents on how to safeguard their properties from fire. Sessions are going to be running from July 17th through August 5th. So for further details, please see the TNRL website at tnrl.ca. We have an operations update. The new 5-year contracts for the operations, maintenance, and hauling at the TNRD solid waste management facilities began on Saturday, July 1st. Boro Enterprises is the contractor that now operates all 16 sites in the North and South Thompson area. Northwood Environmental Services now operates the 12 sites in the Nicola Valley and the Western TNRD. Intraplanes operates the Blue River Transfer Station. Thanks to the new contractors and the TNRD Solid Waste and Recycling Department staff who worked overtime on the long weekend to assist with this major operational transition. We look forward to working with these contractors to provide a high level of service to TNRD residents, member municipalities, and the First Nations communities that we serve. As per the TNRD's press release of July 5th, the TNRD mourns the tragic and sudden loss of City of Merritt Councillor Claire Newman. Claire was elected councillor for the City of Merritt on October 15th, 2022. She previously served as a councillor for the District of Logan Lake, both of which are member municipalities of the TNRD. The TNRD family offers its condolences and expresses its sympathy for Claire's friends and family, and for the respective council members, staff members, and residents within the City of Merritt and the District of Logan Lake. Flags outside the TNRD Civic Building have been lowered to half-mast in mourning of Claire's passing. One note that I wanted to add was a congratulations to the many Thompson-Nicola Regional District residents who were able to realize the dream of a lifetime on June 27th. A number of residents from Ashcroft, from TNRD Area I, from Clinton, from Clearwater, and from Kamloops, under the directorship of Concertmaster Svetozar Vutev of KSO, were able to travel to Carnegie Hall in New York and sing there as part of a major international choir ensemble. They performed for 40 minutes. Among the people who were there participating and can now say that they have sung at Carnegie Hall were Village of Ashcroft CAO Daniela Dick, who's from Clinton, and a longtime TNRL employee Faylene Frains of Ashcroft, who works at the Ashcroft and Cache Creek Libraries. So congratulations to all these TNRD residents. They put in about a year and a half of rehearsing, and it all paid off when they were performing in New York City on the 27th of June. We have Director Stamer from the District of Barrier attending via Zoom today. Hello, Director Stamer out there in Zoom land. Oh, all right. Well, he's represents the District of Barrier, but we don't actually know where he is at the moment. We have a number of alternate directors here, so I'd like to welcome for Director Bass, alternate Director Beppel, for Director Blackwell, alternate Director Frizzle, for Director Onslow, alternate Director Broughton, for Director Sow, alternate Director Lampro, and for Director Rain, alternate Director O'Toole. I believe the spotlights above your chairs are not working today, so you're safe. Upcoming meetings and events, August 16th and 17th, we have the out-of-town board meeting, which is a tour of the beautiful North Thompson, stops in McClure, Little Fort, Blackpool, Clearwater, Simp First Nation, and Blue River. The board meeting in August will take place at 9 a.m. on August 17th at the Blue River Community Hall. And while we were up in the North Thompson, we will be on August 17th at 11:30, attending the grand opening ribbon cutting of the Blue River pedestrian bridge, followed at noon by a community barbecue at the Blue River Community Hall. Do we have any additions to or deletions from the agenda? Director Getz?
This will be very short here. Just wanted to pass on your well wishes that were given to me. It's been a hectic time, but all of these will be printed off and put in a book for Claire. Claire truly loved civil politics. She gave a third of her life to it, and she loved the TNRD. She wanted me to put her on the TNRD before she was elected, backed me into a corner and said, if I get on there, you put me on TNRD. And I said, okay, you bet. She had a lot of great friends, but one of her best friends was Mary Robin Smith. Sorry. It's still very hard to deal with. We all became a family, and this was part of her family, and she loved you the most, Robin, because she never didn't talk about you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director Getz. So are there additions to or deletions from today's agenda? Seeing none, motion to approve the agenda as presented. Director Laird, seconded by Director Jim Smith. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. We have the regular board meeting minutes of the June 15th meeting. There is a recommendation. Thank you, Director Hall, seconded by Director Thorpe. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor, opposed if any, that is carried. We have a delegation today, and that is from the BC Wildfire Service, a presentation from Gerard Schroeder, who I believe is here with us, and Curtis Isfeld, who is out there in Zoom land. So the questions that were sent in by directors were forwarded to BC Wildfire Service and should be covered in the presentation that you're about to hear. So gentlemen, that said, take it away.
Hi, folks. Yeah, thanks for having me today. I don't know most of you, so I'm pleased to meet all of you. My name is Jared Schroeder. I am the Deputy Fire Center Manager here in the Kamloops Fire Center. Curtis Isfeld, the Director of Fire Center Operations, is joining via Zoom. Curtis? Great. So yeah, I guess I'll lead off by saying thanks so much for getting the questions in beforehand. It really helps me and Curtis craft a more articulate response in order to answer the things that you're looking to hear from and hopefully generate even some discussion after a bit of a presentation. I don't have a slide deck or anything like that. Prefer conversation in this space. So yeah, maybe we'll just get right into it. To lead off, I know I was kind of thinking about doing like a broader outlook, but I think I'll keep it slim and specific to our region here. I think we all understand the situation provincially that BC as province is in. Our partners to the north, Caribou, Prince George Fire Center, the Northwest Fire Center is dealing with some pretty significant wildfire incidents, numerous evacuation orders, alerts. Regionally here in Kamloops, we've been holding our own. That's not to say things haven't been busy, that we aren't dealing with, high levels of drought, extreme levels of drought in some areas, resource shortages because we're supporting the north, but also maintaining our own capability here locally to respond. But we are holding our own. Just over the last weekend, we've had over 40 new starts within the Kamloops Fire Center. I would suggest that around 25 to 30 of them have been like kind of within the TNRD locale, so to speak. And we've been catching them. Aggressive initial attack does remain our priority here in Kamloops, but we do as well maintain the ability to support our northern partners in the other fire centers and communities with resources too. And we've been happy to do so. I'll also extend some gratitude and thanks to our local governments and First Nations for the incidents that we've been responding to jointly alongside each other as partners. Especially right now in these times where we are short resources, it is those partnerships and us working together with local governments, First Nations, residents, and that's everything, not just the boots on the ground, equipment trundling through the trees, but the folks that are reporting fires online through the app, through the 1-800 number and Star Quad 5. So that's a thanks to everybody here and all your constituents and the people within TNRD and overarchingly through the province. Going forward, it's going to remain hot and dry. Here in Kamloops, the same applies. We all know, we're familiar with how the fire season typically runs through, especially down south. We're getting into high summer here and we are expecting more warm and dry weather. We're resourcing appropriately. We're continuing to support where we can, and our priority values do still remain initial attack through our community and interface zones, as well as protecting critical infrastructure as those fires arise as well. Okay, yeah, as to the questions, great list here. Some of the common themes throughout are kind of around the on-the-ground contributions, contracts, resources, landowner contributions to fires, some fire smart, prevention funding, those types of avenues. I'll start with probably the funding for prevention initiatives and whatnot. Let's see. All right. One of the questions, will there be a consideration to wildfire crews being to look at egress routes specifically looking into routes in the shoulder season to ensure signage is in place. Yes, the development or updating of community wildfire resiliency plans is an eligible activity for funding. That can be done through our CRI program, the Community Resilience Investment Program. That can be applied through TNRD. If you have additional questions on that space, you can reach out to the fire center for those egress routes and those types of things. That also incorporates those linkages to other plans within a community, including those emergency type plans that are specific to the wildfire resiliency plan overarching. Have we figured out a system to collaborate with landowners, ranchers, loggers, and forest companies and contractors to go in and work on fires in their area that are covered by insurance? There are a number of avenues to do so. I'll lean on here for the first kind of space, particular to local farmers, in that the BC Cattlemen's Association has developed a liaison program where pre-identified and trained liaisons are activated by BC Wildfire through the association, and we can incorporate those individuals onto incidents into our fire center in order to leverage those farmers, those landowners, that local expertise that might have terrain or backroads type knowledge, those types of things. So that's one avenue. That's through the BC Cattlemen's Association, and an excellent tool that we used even as recently last year on a couple fires down south and even up north here in Mariana Creek. As for the insurance piece, there's a number of private providers for insurance that can provide for equipment. Certainly, we encourage folks who are intending on utilizing their equipment for those purposes to obtain that insurance. Absolutely. The best practice is to have that equipment insured by the equipment owner if they're supporting wildfire suppression efforts. There was an addendum I received a little later on too, just a quick answer here. Throughout the region, we have over 175 pieces of heavy equipment, logging, excavator, that type of equipment, skidders and whatnot signed up for this year. So it's a pretty significant amount. When it comes to signing up equipment, again, this is in support of that local resource, local contractor, local equipment hiring practices. We have a primary avenue that's done, that's called the equipment rental agreement. That's initiated through the local zone, through the fire center. We sign the equipment up and we can hire them on to fight fires or to be stood up on prep and be prepared to respond to fires. The best way to go through that is to contact the fire center, contact the zone, and we can get the process started on signing up these equipment rental agreements. I want to touch, just one more quick little bit about the number of options we have available to incorporate local knowledge as well. We do have a newly minted contract process that's provincial in scope for First Nations liaisons and community liaisons, a really important piece that we've even now still ongoing and signing more and more individuals up for. This has been a real help to us in recognizing everything from culturally and archaeologically significant sites to, again, more those local kind of background industrial type knowledge pieces, you know, for assistance when it comes to building line or cutting guard, or even just recognizing local residents, locations of critical values, protecting critical infrastructure and items at risk. As opposed, and back to the equipment too, most of this stuff is hired on prior to fire season. That's kind of in that March, May region. That doesn't mean you're kind of like out of the loop or anything. Absolutely. We're always looking to sign up more. If there's more folks that would like to get signed up with equipment, absolutely. And I do really want to stress that those relationships are best held in our local zone offices, you know, here in Kamloops, in the Kamloops Fire Zone would be the place to initiate those conversations. And certainly if folks, have questions or want to reach out, I mean, can always get a hold of me as well. I can point them in to the right person. I got a number of questions too about a pass system. I got the sense that there's a couple different avenues here. I'll start first with the area restriction one, because that's actually what BC Wildfire has the jurisdictional authority over. And we've got an area restriction in place. It's done so for a number of reasons, be it local hazard, fire hazard, critical work being done, safety sensitive type work being done. It could be due to a local fire hazard and things like that. Any residents or landowners or folks looking to come to and from, it's just a process of getting a hold of the fire center. That is the pass system. That's provincial. If folks are looking to come to and from, can contact the fire center direct, and we can have that discussion in regards to the protocols and the orders in place that go along with that area restriction. When it comes to members of the public that are looking for access to and from an area of an evacuation order or alert, this is done through the regional district. We just make recommendations for orders and alert. We can do tactical pieces in the heat of the moment sort of space. But when it comes to the actual evacuation orders and alerts for folks looking to come to and from and looking for those types of passes and access, that has to go through the regional district. That's not an authority that we can grant. Okay, I wanted to just touch base a little bit more on the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund as well, because there was a couple questions here too, looking for funding for things like EOCs, disaster risk reduction, support services, public notifications, and evacuation route planning. This is a funding plan that applications are opening here, I think, right away, and in some cases here pretty soon. But the important things to note is that they're due by October and January. So again, that's for these EOC type of upgrades. These are for disaster risk reduction support services, and yeah, some of those evacuation and public route planning services as well. So there's a funding model for that one. Broader out though, and I think that this is pretty interesting and goes back to the local connections for resources and intelligence and knowledge, is launched in 2022. We started up the Cooperative Community Wildfire Response Project. And the whole goal of that is improving that communication and cooperation between rural and Indigenous communities and the partnering response agencies. Now, we understand that we need to look at engaging the small and more self-organized community type groups and really leveraging the opportunity we have to work with them and together in order to meet a varying degree of incident objectives and improvements. So where that's at, the project team is stood up. They're working with Indigenous communities. They're a little bit further ahead along on that aspect, and also working with local communities as well. Again, that liaison piece that I mentioned a little bit earlier kind of falls under there, as well as kind of starting to take a look at some of the more broader aspects, like actual cooperative response and how that applies into the field when we're actually in those types of scenarios. And it's pretty interesting because it's a collaborative effort. So that's between us, the First Nations Emergency Services Society, FINESS, Indigenous Services Canada, UBC, University of British Columbia, Fraser Basin Council, and BC Cattlemen's. So there's a number of players involved. There's a number of folks that are stood up on this group, and they're all working with their respective agencies and individuals in order to garner some of this more broader information and to delivering on those aspects. These engagements, they're standard practice for us with rural communities and First Nations, just as part of the response efforts of the fire season. It's standard for us to engage and connect and have the conversations, but building the actual collaborative response is kind of it is the focus of this project. Curtis, maybe I'll defer to you on this one as well, if you have anything to add for the cooperative response piece.
Sure, thanks, Jared. And good afternoon, folks. The only thing I would add to that is that the Fraser Basin Council portion that Jared spoke to is we're leaning on Fraser Basin Council with their wildfire engagement roundtables. So as far as opportunities to have your voice heard for any of you that may sit on those tables or represent communities that can have access to those tables, we encourage you to provide your feedback, because that will be collected and will inform a what we heard report that the Fraser Basin Council is going to wrap up for us. As well, if any of you will be attending this coming UBCM, we'll be there as a project team doing a presentation there, and look forward to any kind of conversations at that event as well. I think the important part of this project is that what it will do for us is it will create sort of pathways, I guess you could call them, or tools for those self-organized, more rural community groups and us as a response agency to kind of meet each other where we're at and become more integrated in our efforts. So looking forward for this project to gain some momentum. Again, would encourage you to to engage at those tables, at the round tables. I don't know exactly where they are within the TNRD, but I suspect there is at least one or two of the 8 tables that Fraser Basin Council currently administers.
Great, thanks, Curtis. 2 more questions I want to make sure got tackled here. Are improvements being made to reporting wildfires, and is there someone given the authorization to action it? How does this process run? It's a great question. We've got the standard 1-800 number and star quad 5 to report a fire. But most recently, we've been really leaning on, and the public has been really leaning on our mobile app, and what a fantastic tool it's turned out to be. And I won't proclaim to be an expert in app use, but frankly, and hearing from our responding officers, our regional wildfire coordination centers, the very fact alone that people can upload a photo and send that in provides that critical real-time intel, and something just as simple as a photo. It makes a big difference in our response. So it's available for iOS, it's available for all the other, Android. And folks are asking, just go get it. It's a great tool. There's still the standard, the 1-800 number and star quad 5 as well. And it really just I really stress, and it says right on it to upload any and all photos that you can. They're geo-referenced too, which is super important. So wherever it's being taken from, that's collected. So what a great tool. Lastly, I wanted to make sure this one got touched on too. Is there a possibility to supply mitigation on private lands? And moreover, will they anticipate changing this policy and law involving this matter? So residential assessments and rebates are one of the eligible activities that First Nations, municipal and regional governments can apply for through the CRI. That's that Community Resiliency Investment Program, through that funding system. Providing the offsite vegetative debris disposal for residential property or homeowners who have undertaken their own vegetation management is another activity that this funding can be received for through the CRI program. So again, that's an application through the CRI program to get that mitigation done on private lands. So that was it for the submitted questions. I'm not sure if there was anything else to add, Kevin or Curtis, if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And so first of all, hopefully the presentation answered many of the questions that were submitted beforehand. If anyone has any additional questions for either Curtis or Gerard, this is the time, this is the time to do so. So if you do have a question, please put your hand up now. Okay. Director Smith, Director Sarai, Director Stamer, alternate Director Frizzle, Newstater, Houghton. I've got one. So I've got Directors Jim Smith, Sarai, Stamer, alternate Director Frizzle, Director Newstater, and Director Houghton. Is there anyone I have missed? All right, then we will start off with Director Smith.
Just a quick question based on manpower availability. We've been hearing some stories about the lack of, and that you're still trying to build forces in a lot of areas. So I'm just wondering how that's going.
Yeah, there's no way that, given the national situation, and I'll start there, that any of the agencies engaged in firefighting throughout Canada could staff all the fires in any traditional sense. Specific to Kamloops and the TNRD as a whole, regionally and locally, we're resourced appropriately for our preparedness level where we're designated at. As I mentioned, that we are picking up a fair number of lightning starts. We are expecting more. There will be more to come. But given our current resource availability in our region, we're confident in the numbers that we do have, as well in the flexibility and the creativity we have with our partnering agencies, our contract crews that are available locally as well, in order to meet any new starts that we have regionally.
Thank you, Director Sarai.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared, for that presentation. You mentioned, and it's to do with manpower, when you said you had 175 pieces of equipment, whether it's contractors and backup, is hopefully we don't have to use any of them, but if there are fires, are there certain pieces of equipment that we lack in the inventory that we need to be in front of? And is this adequate to cover fires that happen in our region? Or are we going to be scrambling at any time?
Yeah, that's what a fantastic question. I could talk operations all day. And I welcome it. So yeah, we have, and I checked this morning because I wanted to make sure I came to this group with an accurate number. We have 174 pieces specifically signed up, and that's everything from logging equipment to water tenders to any type of support vehicle that we might need. Now, we can't control what signs up. We can certainly and do make calls regionally and locally through relationships, through some of our other endeavors. When we notice a specific need, whether it's feller bunchers or skidders or D5s or 6s or whatever, dozers. Regionally, critical shortage of a piece of equipment. I can't think of anything specific. Like I don't think I could say we need 10 more cats. For what we do have engaged in the firefighting efforts that we're currently employed in, we have more than enough. But I won't beat around the bush and say that all it takes is 1 or 2 large fires to stretch that. And would we still have enough regionally to cover? Probably, but then you add 2 or 3 more and maybe not. So we're resourced appropriately for now. We are resourced appropriately to engage in probably a number of larger incidents. But I would certainly stress that anybody who has available equipment, sign it up and get a hold of the center and the local zone office for sure.
Thank you very much, Director Stamer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Thanks again. Yes, I'm in Williams Lake right now. And first up, I wanted to thank the BC Wildfire Service for their prompt response on the lightning strike that we had on Garrison Mountain, which was up above the East Lake Valley and barrier on Friday night. They got on it very quickly with helicopters. Special thanks to Fire Chief Lampro and the Chichewa Rap Attack that mopped things up on Saturday. Yesterday, there was 3 lightning strikes on Adams. One was right above the Squam Bay 2, where we've got a cabin, 2 more down by the mill. And I know that BC Wildfire Service, again, was on top of it with aircraft. So a couple of quick things. Premier Eby mentioned that there was additional aircraft being made available. So what does that look like on your end of things, on what your fleet has right now at your disposal and what you're looking for? And the other thing I heard was the additional resources internationally with boots on the ground. So can you fill us in on when they're going to arrive and how they're going to be able to integrate that into the fire plan?
Yeah, I can answer that. And Curtis, feel free to jump in too, as you may have more of a provincial scope on that piece. I'll start with the aircraft one. You may have noticed, or maybe not, but we've recently had 2 CL-415 water skimmers join us from the USA. So that's an additional 2 water bombers that have joined the fleet temporarily in order to help us meet our resource needs for aviation assets here during the next coming weeks. As well, when it comes to international resources coming to assist us in our ongoing endeavors, this is correct that we do have a number coming in from the United States and a couple other of our international and continental partners to bolster our forces. Now, how many of those land in the Kamloops Fire Center will depend entirely upon the types of incidents that we have and the types of requirements those incidents need. Currently, and I appreciate your thanks, we are taking initial attack right now, and as we always do, very aggressively with as many resources as we can dispatch, and those are both good examples of those efforts. But to answer the point, those manpower resources, as they come in, they are prioritized provincially. The critical fires are up north, but that does not take away from the critical new incidents that start down here, where our initial attack forces remain in place with sustained forces to bolster. Curtis, if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, I can just touch on a bit more detail on the aircraft. We normally have eight air tanker groups that consist of about 22 aircraft, and we're currently operating with 34. So we are 12 aircraft surplus from where we normally would be. These aircraft are coming in from all over the place, nationally and internationally. The 415s that Jared mentioned, we're actually adding an additional 2 this week. So well supported in that way. Helicopters or rotary wings, we just tipped over 100 hired provincially. That's been a very scarce resource this year, primarily because of national activity early on in Quebec and Alberta, where those jurisdictions were paying ferry time to have British Columbia assets moved over to their jurisdiction. So we lost a lot of capacity that way. I'm starting to see that trickle back in now that the situation in Quebec and Alberta is starting to de-escalate a bit. And just on the human resource piece, the last order that we submitted through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fires Center was for 1,000 personnel. So now that has not been filled, but there's components of that are starting to trickle in.
Good.
Thank you. Alternate Director Frizzle.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you also for BC Wildfire for the fires that we had in Clearwater. We had one right behind our ski hill, and that was caught quite quickly. I was up there the following day looking for huckleberries and found your people there. And it was really dry. It's really dry and it's really scary. So I appreciate the quick response. Most of the questions I had were answered. That you're very confident in the numbers that you have of people to work on the fires, but are you doing anything to initiate programs to get people trained up quickly and able to get out into a fire ASAP, even if it's during the winter, so they're ready to go?
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I mean, we have our standard training packages that occur throughout our entire hiring season, which effectively starts in November and culminates in May. This year, we trained a significantly larger amount of people than normal. And that was not due to a result of turnover or people changing positions. In fact, we added a significant number of new firefighting positions to our BC Wildfire Services Corps this year. And a number of things that we did in that aspect was changing our initial attack crews from 3-person crews to 4-person crews. So that's 1 additional firefighter per initial attack crew. And then we added 1 more individual at the supervisory level to our unit crews provincially. And that was each of our unit crews provincial received 1 of those. In addition to that, we converted a number of seasonal positions that have been traditionally seasonal over the years to regular full-time. So they have the ability to hire, train, mentor, and guide all of these new staff more permanently and to keep that process ongoing. All of this in the effect to generate and incorporate a broader and more robust and more reliable firefighting program. One other thing we did this year was bolster some of our smaller bases with an additional cruise or 2 in order to allow people to take time off. We had some bases, remote location bases, isolated locations, and even some more of our regular rural detachments that only had a couple crews in them. And what that meant was folks just simply couldn't get time off and they were effectively stuck all year. So we have boosted our numbers that way for our internal numbers. The amount of additional forces we've added this year, to answer your question maybe a little bit more directly, we've been fairly proactive this year, signing folks up and engaging with communities on entry-level firefighting crew contracts. We've signed regionally this year 3 new ones. We have a number of Indigenous initial attack agreements in play, SIMP being one, and we are working on signing up a couple more to continue to bolster those forces. Now we're continuing those conversations with our partners as we can, with the intentions of boosting those forces.
Thank you. Director Newstader.
Thank you through the chair. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you as well in BC Wildfire, all of the employees that are there and the work that you've done, the work you continue to do and the work you'll do in the future. So our deep gratitude for the sleepless nights and the cost you pay. My question is still around an original one that I submitted, and I'm not sure that I fully understand how it fits into the answer. So just trying to dig it down a little bit more deeply. I understand about not hiring contractors to fight, or what it looks like to hire contractors to fight. That makes sense to me. But my question is around allowing, or maybe even empowering rural property owners to defend their property and what that looks like. I understand there's considerable risk involved, of course, and insurance and all of those various things. But when we look back at 2021, I went out and sat with the people of White Rock Lake who had lost their homes in that time, went out with our MLA and spent considerable time with people who had lost their homes. And the consistent story was that those who had left their property lost their property. Those who defied the orders and stayed still had their home standing. And you can still go out and see that. A large number of those people are still displaced, have been battling insurance ever since, and they look at their neighbors and say, if I had stayed with my pump, with my industrial sized hose that I have, with my experience of generational firefighting to defend property and livelihood, I would not be in this position right now. But because I trusted what I was told and I followed the orders and I evacuated and left, I have a lifelong struggle in front of me. And I'm trying to understand if anything has changed since 2021, or whether there's a concerted effort that's been made to leverage that manpower and those resources, and what it looks like to talk to people in similar situations who are trying to grapple with that fine line between obeying the order and wanting to comply, and knowing the substantial risk that they're taking in doing so. So I wonder if you could just talk a little about landowners' involvement and whether anything has changed since that time.
Yeah, certainly recognize the sentiments, and I'll lead off by saying that evacuation alerts and orders, they're not put in lightly, and they're not meant to be put in at the detriment of the landowner or the resident. The entire intent is public safety. And I think it's a good way to frame the conversation. I understand the piece about, stay and defend, and, what difference could I have made versus what my neighbor could have made. I think there's another side of the argument that maybe exists as well, is like, what could have happened if I stayed? Maybe something much worse. So I think it's important to lead off in understanding that, we need to obey orders to evacuate, and that's really important. And recognizing that the impacts that not departing can have on first responders and everybody else involved in the operation. Specific to the landowner piece and accessing and empowering them to be more active or proactive even in the response. There have been some steps taken in response to 2021. We've made it easier to sign equipment up. And I really want to stress how important it is to have equipment signed up and not just responding. I understand, and I've lived through it in other times and places, but we've taken great efforts in building a better online system, an online vendor portal to sign equipment up. It's relatively simple in comparison to the older way of signing equipment up. And as well, building the communication with the local zone office is super important here too, in that understanding the other avenues available through that community cooperative response project that is just standing up as we develop some more of these processes in relationship with, cattlemen's and whatnot. And we're going to need to rely on those partners as well to help us build this into a place where people do feel empowered and they do feel that they're working alongside and with BC Wildfire and with their partnering local governments and agencies as well. I don't know, Curtis, if you had more to add, maybe even specific to the vendor portal, it could be helpful.
Yeah, I think you summarized it really well, Jared. And I guess the issue that the director has raised is precisely what's trying to be resolved within the Cooperative Community Wildfire Response Project, and the reason why it was initiated. There is one of the outputs or pathways, or some of the outputs and pathways, is really around addressing the issues on training. So what level of training do these rural communities require to operate safely? Address the issues of liability. So when we say that, we're not having community members acting independently or in parallel to BC Wildfire, rather doing it in an integrated manner where we can ensure that safety parameters are met. And then lastly, too, there's also an opportunity to explore equipment. So in relation to the CRI program that Jared spoke to earlier, what can we do to augment communities with things like equipment caches and help maintain those caches? So it really aims to address the issues that you've raised. We started very purposely in the, there's two streams to this project, and the first stream is focused on Indigenous communities. And that's primarily in response to UNDRIP and the Reconciliation Act in British Columbia. And we've started in there and we've made some very good progress. And stream 2, which is rural communities, that's the piece that I spoke to around the engagement sessions, the roundtable. So this is where this information needs to be collected to help inform those pathways and tools.
I understand our presenters have to leave in 4 minutes. So Director Newsteeder, do you have a supplemental? And I also have Directors Houghton, Beppel, O'Reilly, and Director Stamer. So please keep it succinct.
Really quick supplemental. How is that program being communicated and what can we do to help you communicate it to those property owners?
Yeah, there's a number of avenues being communicated. I hate to promote a pamphlet, but we have produced outward facing on the web, in local offices and via email. I'm certain that the TNRD Fire Smart Community Liaison would have received or will receive, and I can make sure that gets sent out to TNRD. There's a pretty good information package specific to what Curtis has referenced. If it has not come out, and I know it has, but probably a while ago, I'll make sure it comes back. So it has all of those bullets outlined, as well as context and updates on where a lot of those pieces currently reside in development. And then we'll also incorporate the touch points for feeding upwards into the group.
Director Houghton?
Yes, thank you. Make it quick. Some of our ranching community has ranches within 2, 3, sometimes 4 regional districts in the province of BC. And of course, when there's a fire at any one of them, you have to get in and out and still operate somehow within them. Is there going to be a standardized system? I know I've talked to Kevin a bit at BC Cattlelands, where we're going to, between regional districts, where our path system, we're going to have a standardized system of between all regional districts instead of having one for one and one for another and different set of rules over here. Will there be something standardized throughout the province for that? Thank you.
And sorry, Director, when you mean a pass system, are you speaking specifically to like when there's orders and alerts in place?
Well, like if you want to get into, say, look for some cattle, or maybe there's a haying situation, you want to get in and you want some time in there, but you want to get out, a standardized systems amongst regional districts for those purposes.
Yeah. I would say specific to when we've got ongoing incidents, there is a process, and that is through the governing agency. Most times that'll be BC Wildfire. The connection point also resides through the regional district. Now, between regional district to regional district, I think there's BC Wildfire, we can act as a managing authority for the wildfire incident itself, but for generating a pass system to go in between, that would have to reside between the liaison attached.
Thank you.
Alternate Director Beppel?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Schroeder. This is a question about the primarily volunteer fire departments and how BC Wildfire works with those volunteer fire departments. I know here in City of Kamloops, there is a very strong relationship between the wildfire service and the fire department, but within the regional district, I'd like you to speak to how you work with the volunteer fire departments, and also what training you might provide to those fire departments and what funds you might provide to help them augment your work, especially in terms of structure fire protection, and whether or not you do any joint training with those volunteer fire departments.
I can answer all of that. So I'll start with the training pieces. We do a fair bit, and I would suggest that all of our relationships with our volunteer departments is strong. Now, it's difficult to coordinate with the volunteer department, admittedly so. But the efforts that our staff take and our zone supervising officers take in this aspect is critically important. It's part of our work plans. It's something that we actually track. And we do work with the local departments in aligning our staff's availability to meet up with their training nights, be it weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. In particular, in the pre-season portions of fire season. And that training can be everything from desktop and simulation based to in the field, working concurrently with each other, like our wildland engines and their pump trucks and tenders and water tenders and ladder truck, well, not quite ladder trucks, but that sort of thing. So a good mix of desktop-based and operationally based cross-training. It's a healthy relationship. How much do we provide? We lead a fair bit of it, and we also receive back as well. It is a two-way partnership in training that I feel quite strongly and proudly about. We do track and follow up on these things throughout the spring because it is a core part of our business, especially here in our region where almost every fire is an interagency or interface type fire in some aspect. So these things are critically important. When it comes to structure protection, I mean, our staff don't do structure protection. I think that part of it is clear. How much training do our staff do in structure protection? It's zero. We'll provide for structure protection. We'll do sprinklering and those types of things, but in an actually engaged structure that's on fire, that's not our jurisdiction. So when it comes to providing funding for apparatus or those types of things, we don't. What we do provide is structural protection services, structural protection units in the form of remote services, trailers, sprinklers, veg-free clearing type work. And as well, we practice that with our partner agencies too.
Thank you, Director O'Reilly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very quick here. After the 21 fires, we had a debrief with BC Wildfire. I believe it was down at Sandman Center at the time due to COVID restrictions. But one thing that was brought up was the amount of frustration that we heard from contractors that had signed up to do work with BC Wildfire. And we're sitting there for till 10, 11, noon type of thing on not just a one-off, it was a daily basis and a recurring theme that we heard, and they felt very frustrated. And that was one thing that we had brought up. So I'm wondering what has been addressed since 21 to get these people that are there ready to work and get them actually fighting the fires rather than waiting for administration to allow them to go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, another great question, Director, and certainly a message that was heard loud and clear on our end. And I'll be honest, in that fire season in particular, there was a lot going on. And I wish my predecessor was here and because he could quote the sheer volume of invoices that was processed that year. It was monumental, but certainly understood as well the toll and the efforts that takes on those that have to do that processing, but as well those that are on the receiving end waiting, you know, for to be paid for goods as delivered. So what's been done since? Some pretty significant steps. In fact, I've mentioned the vendor portal, which Curtis described, that assists with that. We've really made a much better, I feel, proactive effort in getting out and having equipment signed up sooner and earlier. And that alleviates and does have a compounding effect there as well in processing those things. We've bolstered the ranks in our corporate wildfire services branch of our organization as well, with additional procurement clerks, additional administrative services clerks, and finance clerks, who it's essentially just more people to move those things along and get folks paid on time. These things were recognized, and there's an ongoing organizational change and growth occurring in BC Wildfire that isn't just firefighters and airplanes and training. It also involves the corporate business side of things, where we're bolstering our ranks for procurement and invoicing and contracts and all of the other important aspects of this work.
And we will conclude with Director Stamer.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just wanted to point out, and that was a really good segment on what was just answered on with procurement of equipment. But the thing is that I'm still hearing stories of not having an adequate, not necessarily an arbitration system, but a way of determining on these pays on, you know, put it this way, I know of instances where they have been paid, but there's been some discretion on what should be paid and what isn't being paid. And I'd like the BC Wildfire Service to acknowledge that there should be a process that we're able to have a two-way street on that and not just say we're not paying for stuff. And the reason I'm saying that is because I've just heard of a couple of times that this has occurred, and I'm hoping it's not a one-off, that people will get paid for the work that they're doing. And also just to mention on what Director Newstatter said, in 2003, if we hadn't had the evacuation order, we wouldn't have been able to save the town of Barrier. So I know there's frustrations when people are trying to protect their livelihoods, and I've said that as well. But at the same time, we still need people to be able to, if they don't have the experience and they don't have the proper equipment, we need them to be able to leave when it has to be, when it's only safe for them to do so. So I applaud BC Wildfire Service for, like they said, it's not an easy decision, but if we have to get people to go, they have to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Curtis, for coming here today and answering our questions. Very brave of you in some ways. And thank you, directors, for sending in those thoughtful questions ahead of time. I think that made for a good presentation. And yes, I'm not going to say anything about the upcoming fire season because I don't want to jinx anything.
Thanks.
So thank you, gentlemen.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to item 6.2. We have a building infraction, an expired permit in electoral area O. Is there anyone here to speak to this particular issue today?
There is not, Chair Roden.
Thank you. 6.3, building infraction, expired permit, electoral area N. Is there anyone here today to speak to that item?
There's not.
All right, moving right along. Item 7.1, building infraction, expired permit. Apparently we have an instance of the owner trying to be in compliance, so we do have a staff recommendation to that effect. Director Thorpe moves the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Director Getz seconds that. Thank you very much. Do we have any discussion? Nope, seeing none on the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 7.2, building infraction 5111 Railway Drive electoral area N. We also have a recommendation here. Director Sarai moves the recommendation, second by Director Hayward. Thank you very much. Any discussion on this item? Nope, seeing none on the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 8.1 zoning amendment bylaw number 2804 Blackpool in electoral area A. And we do have a recommendation that this be adopted. Director Ranta, thank you very much. Seconded by Director Hammer Jackson. No pressure. I was just looking straight at you. So any discussion on this matter? No, seeing none on the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Zoning amendment bylaw number 2815, AKA the omnibus bylaw. We did have a public hearing regarding this yesterday. Ms. Sadilkova very kindly made some very good notes, which are in your blue folder. And when I can find them, here we go. We had 4 members of the public turn out for the public hearing yesterday. In addition to myself, there were directors Houghton, Hayward, and Jim Smith there, as well as Ms. Jeremiah and Ms. Sadilkova from staff. The 4 members of the public all indicated that they were there regarding this particular bylaw. They were not there for the Green Lake official community plan, so we did not end up doing that presentation. The only 2 members of the public who spoke were Mr. Terrence Mitchell, who lives at Adams Lake East Forest Service Road. He is the owner of Grizzly Adams Lake Resort, and he indicated that he was in favor of the zoning change in this bylaw that would affect his property. The other person who spoke was Mr. Matthew Ezekiel of Holloway Drive in Kamloops. He explained he is one of the owners of Lovato Developments, which owns land in Tobiano. And he noted that he supports secondary suites in Tobiano because of high house pricing being high for young families. It was also noted during Ms. Sedilkova's presentation that the proposed changes to the allowing secondary suites, it is only applies to a very small portion of Tobiano. Most of the rest of Tobiano does currently allow secondary suites. It is this one area which currently does not. So that was the public hearing. And we have a series of recommendations here. Who was that? Director Getz moves recommendation 1. Do we have a seconder? Director Thorpe, thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the staff for preparing this bill that covers off so many items. I'd like to speak to one particular item, and that's the Tobiano item. I think that there's some unintended consequences that might flow from the recommendation as it's written. And I'll preface that by saying that I have spoken to folks at Tobiano and Cherry Creek about the proposed amendment when it came out. Had a wonderful conversation with the planning staff on this issue. A lot of folks have said that the proposed recommendation by dropping the limit, the 80 square meters, and going to the 40% of the area of the house eviscerates the single family housing categories, resort house and equestrian house, more or less turns them, their comments were into duplexes. And so that was a feedback that I shared with the planning staff, and it was reiterated at a recent Tobiano homeowners meeting that was dealing with other matters, but it was certainly raised at that point. But to put it in context, in November, this board approved a variance application at Tobiano, not on the street, but in an equestrian area. It was a 6,000 square foot house that you might recall. We approved a larger secondary suite from 80 meters to 93 square meters. That's 1,000 square feet that we approved in a 6,000 square foot house. Had this amendment been in place and applied to this very application, the previous application, that the amendment would have allowed a 2,400 square foot secondary suite as opposed to the 1,000 square foot that we approved. It would have, in that case, have allowed for a 223 square meter secondary suite, which I think is, well, mathematically, it's a 279% increase over the current zoning if it had applied to that particular application. So I appreciate and I support the idea that there should be some relief to the secondary suite 80 square meter limitation. But I think that the bylaw as it's written has the unintended effect that we're going to see applications that might do much like the Breezeway amendment in the same omnibus bill, have somebody sort of squeak in 2 housing units on 1 housing site because of the 40% number. And I'm also mindful that in March we approved, we're going to have a broader planning staff review of the Tobiano rezoning. And so the opportunity exists to reconsider whether the 80 square meter number or some other number or the 40% number, an opportunity to engage the public at Tobiano about what the right number would be for a secondary suite and whether duplexes should be permitted. So I say all of that because I think that if we approve the bylaw, even though it's focused on one specific area, actually the very first area that was developed at Tobiano before secondary suites were considered, it will have consequences on a broader basis at Tobiano. And so on that basis, I had thought about could we modify this proposal for consideration? But I think it's better to withdraw it from the omnibus bill and then revisit this in a public context so that the omnibus bill, other items can, of course, stand on their own. So I don't know, Chair, whether I need to file that motion now, but it would be my intent to propose that the Tobiano section of that omnibus bill be pulled back and then revisited when we get to the March, well, when we follow up with the March review. Because I don't think that this bylaw as written is going to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Hey, Ms. Campbell, are we able to withdraw one item and continue with the rest, or does the whole bylaw get held up because of one item?
Through the chair, no, Director Grenier can propose that those sections of the bylaw come out. I just want to clarify, Director Grenier, though, you're proposing all three sections of the bylaw related to Tobiano. My understanding is 3.12, 3.13, and 3.14, and Ms. Sadilkova can probably confirm that those all relate to Tobiano. So you're proposing that those be removed from the bylaw.
I am, because I think that the whole issue should be reviewed in context in a broader forum.
So Director Grenier, we just need a seconder for that change.
So that is moved by Director Grenier, seconded by Director Houghton. And that is that the three items that relate to Tobiano be withdrawn, and that the rest of the bylaw proceed as written. So any discussion on this particular amendment? Director O'Reilly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Ms. Sadilkova, the example that was given on the 6,000 square foot home and a 40% suite, is that something that actually would apply to that 6,000 square foot home? The way that this is written or not? I'm just trying to understand, because that is a fairly large suite.
So, historically, and it probably changed about 6 years ago, the BC building code had a limit in suite size, but it was 90 square meters, which is about 980 square feet. So it's less than 1,000 square meters. So that was there. That was pulled out of the BC building code for a variety of reasons. In Tobiano, almost all except for one of the subzones, RA2, the other residential zones allowed so not the townhomes, but the SFD single family dwellings were allowed one secondary suite, but it was limited to 80 square meters, which we've had some variances on that. And we've had one, and we'll probably have another rezoning depending on what happens today in the other zone where no suites are allowed. You can vary the area of a suite, but if you're not allowed a suite and you want a suite, that's not a variance, that's a rezoning. So that's number one. Number two, yes, your math is correct. At present, the way the bylaw is written, where they're allowed a suite, that limit in size, so you have a 6,000 square foot house, your suite can still only be 850, regardless of the building code, your suite can only be 850 square feet in that home. So does that?
Yeah.
Okay, answer.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Director Grenier?
Just a point of clarification, that area was the very first subdivision called the Bluff Lot subdivision that was approved. And it precipitated the comprehensive zoning, which included the secondary suite. And so it is the case, most of that Bluff, certainly all of that Bluff subdivision, the lots were sold to individuals. I would say 70% of it is already built out. So we're only dealing with 30% that hasn't yet been built out. And the residents in that neighborhood had certain expectations as to the housing form as expressed by the written proposal that came in. So in terms of math, if we are going to approve secondary suites, I think we ought to have a really good handle on what the maximum size of a secondary suite should be for a 6,000 square foot house, for a 2,000 square foot house, and where it applies. And my concern is that we're trying to address a problem in in a subdivision that's got 30% left to go, we could deal with that with specific applications. But we're setting a tone for the overall Tobiano development if we approach it with this 40% number. So if we eviscerate the 80 meters and say there is no 80 meter or 110 meter or whatever it is, then we're left with 40% of the household could be up to 40% could apply for a secondary suite. And I think that that's the danger that we have here that can easily be addressed when we go to a Tobiano comprehensive review. And I applaud the efforts to streamline the process and to get us to a number that stops a whole lot of unnecessary applications. But if we only have 2 applications, I'd prefer to deal with the applications and the public comment on those applications rather than deal with this wholesale 40-60 with no public application, like no public hearing, because they would be within their rights if we approve this notion of 40%.
Well, we did have the public hearing yesterday, where
Indeed.
people could have come and
Indeed, and we did
express
have
their
response.
opinions.
We had 1 person in favor and we had 1 person opposed. I would also just add that at Tobiano, 50% of the approved housing is town housing and cottage homes. Summers Landing, the average size of a house at Summers Landing is 1,400 square feet. There is no shortage of approved land for townhouse and smaller housing sizes to meet the needs of the public demand. The developer certainly could take areas of Tobiano to meet that demand. So we're really just talking about changing the nature of an established neighborhood. And I'm not sure that this is the right way to go about it through the omnibus bill. I think it should be more comprehensive than that. Thank you.
So the amendment would see items 3.12, 3.13, and 3.14 removed from the omnibus bylaw. So is there any further discussion on this amendment? Vice Chair Smith?
I just have a question of staff, whether there's any indication. I understand the province is looking at sort of taking a broad brush and allowing suites in all residential single family. So is there any sort of indication from the province, first of all, when that might happen? And second of all, what sort of they're going to use in terms of guidelines for spatial, in what type, how much space of you can use for a suite? My concern is that if we don't do something, the province is going to do it for us regardless.
So there's other provinces in the country that have done that more than 10 years ago already. If you had a single family dwelling, you were entitled to 1 suite, a granny suite or in-law suite or whatever kind of revenue suite. It wasn't in British Columbia. And yes, as per the Premier's announcement, they went all in. And now we know they're looking at it. We know they're talking to people, but we don't know what the specifics will be or whether there'll be a limited area, and that would override our zoning.
Any further discussion on Director Grenier's proposed amendment? Okay, I've got Director Lepso and alternate Director Beppel.
And thank you very much. I just always have problems making instant decisions. I would like to know, like just an example for this one, if you could email us ahead of time, because now you're bringing up something and I've got to make a decision in a minute. Like you might be correct. I just don't. I like to think about things. So just my comment in the future for myself. If you have a change, if you can let me know ahead of time, it might allow me to make a better judgment. So thank you.
Alternate Director Beppel?
I guess I would just say that for myself, having a secondary suite added to the zoning is not an issue. I think what I hear from Director Grenier is the size of the suite, which I think is a fair argument, depending on, we've gone for square footage and now we're going to a percentage of if that's what we want to have. That's your argument, right? You're not arguing that we shouldn't have secondary suites in this area. Is that true?
Indeed, at Tobiano, other than this remaining 30% of the first phase, secondary suites and resort houses and cottage homes are permitted. And the issue is just simply, should we increase it? But should we increase it from 80 square meters to what could have been 223 square meters on that November application? That's the concern. And I think that we can correct that at another opportunity. We are scheduled to have a Tobiano public hearing. We can get public comment on that approach. So we had it last night from 2 people. We had 4 and against. But I think we have the knowledge of what we approved in November and what would have been the case of that same application in November.
So through to the chair, if I vote in favor of Director Garnier's motion to sever this part of the bylaw, is there certainty that it will come back to the board to address having secondary suites in this part of Tobiano?
Thank you. Yes, I was going to ask just for clarification on that from Ms. Sadilkova to make sure that directors are aware that this will not now just disappear and never be heard from again. We will be dealing with it again in the future.
Yes, absolutely. With or without me, it will be dealt with in the future. And as per the current section of the CD1 zone, the vast majority of an existing zone is attached to the report. They'll continue to have suites, but the 40% is there as well as the cap of 80 square meters. So what we were taking out is the cap. The cap will still be there. So now you can still have a suite, but at a smaller area, and the one area by the bluffs, that the only little area that isn't allowed suites will continue to not be allowed suites unless they apply or until the province overrides us. Is that clear?
Does that answer your question, Alternate Director Beppel?
Well, the only little area that doesn't have suites, my expectation is that they will get suites in the future with some sort of definition. That's what I'm hoping.
And if I'm understanding Director Grenier correctly, he is not opposed to having suites if allowed in that particular area. It is purely the size of any suite anywhere in Tobiano with which he is concerned. And so that will be coming back to the board to discuss with public input from Tobiano residents.
Correct.
Any further, Director Middleton?
Thank you. Just a quick question. When we're talking on this, and I don't dispute numbers, but when you talk about 30% of this particular area not being built out yet, that this really only affects 30% to be built. But in effect, an existing home that doesn't have a suite now could be renovated to have a suite. So you could see significant numbers of suites into existing homes by doing this, and by sort of deferring and getting that size versus percentage straightened out will prevent existing homes from putting in half their homes into actually being a suite or a duplex.
In response to that, that's exactly why I think we need to have further discussion so that residents can say, what about retrofitting houses quite apart from building a new house? And what is the size of the number? As to the 70-30, the 30 that's left, that was called the Bluff subdivision, was developed in 2007. And so the 70% of houses that have been built in that section follow the design guidelines and met the standards of that time. Shortly after the Bluff subdivision was approved, the TNRD came back and said, my gosh, we're dealing with a whole lot of zoning things. So we went to this comprehensive zoning that included secondary suites. So my proposal, and I would certainly support, whatever we finalize with secondary suites for the comprehensive zone also apply to this subdivision when we get to that comprehensive discussion, which we scheduled or approved in March of this year.
Thank you. All right, On the amendment then, which would see items 3.11, 1.2, and 1.3 removed from the bylaw. All those, this is an unweighted vote, so it's a show of hands only. All those in favor of the amendment? Is anyone opposed? Seeing no one opposed, that is carried. So we move back to the motion, which was that zoning amendment bylaw 2815 be read a second time. That will now be zoning amendment bylaw 2815 as amended be read. Oh, nope, I'm being corrected.
Sorry, Chair Roden, if I may. So it's already been read a second time. The amendment is not to the amendment is not to the recommendation to have it read a second time. The amendment is just to the bylaw. So it's been read a second time, and then it'll be read a third time as amended.
So we have to vote on the second, be read a second time.
Correct.
All right. All right, voting on zoning amendment bylaw 2815 being read a second time. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We move on to the second recommendation, which is now that zoning amendment bylaw 2815 as amended be read a third time. Director Grenier is making that motion, seconded by Director Getz. Thank you. Any discussion? Alternate Director Beppel.
Thank you. Through to Ms. Sidolkova. Has there been any thought to how mobile homes and pre-built or modular homes are sort of moving towards each other, and whether the bylaw that we're putting in place really doesn't reflect the market in terms of what people are buying for housing?
This is a change in the zoning bylaw that's really driven by requests that we're seeing at time of building permit for people to be able to combine the two. Our bylaw explicitly prohibits it. So this is really answering to what people want and trying to find a way to do it that will be acceptable to the neighborhood.
So we're good with sort of keeping the two types of housing separate?
No, the bylaw allows them to be combined into one.
But combining the definition of them?
No, combining them physically. So if you have say you have a small bungalow from whenever on the property, and you want to have a duplex or a secondary suite, depending on how they're combined, you buy a manufactured home and you link the two of them to make one two-family dwelling. Okay.
Any further discussion on the recommendation that it be read a third time as amended? All right, on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And final recommendation, zoning amendment bylaw 2815 be adopted. Director Grenier, seconded by Director Thorpe. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing no hands in the air, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Move on to floodplain management bylaw 2828. We do have 3 recommendations. Director Laird, thank you very much. Seconded by Director Thorpe. So any discussion that floodplain management bylaw 2828 be read a first and second time? Discussion on this point, questions, alternate Director Beppel.
Thanks. And perhaps I didn't read it right, but it seemed to be that this report was towards housing and farm or secondary buildings, but it wasn't clear to me whether industrial sites that were within floodplains were being addressed. So I'm thinking specifically, for instance, in Ashcroft, there's the tie making business that's right on the Thompson near. So are those types of industrial operations covered within this bylaw or not?
Yes, through the chair. So the bylaw applies to all new construction, and it would also apply to industrial. There are some exemptions for certain types of industrial that are flood proofed. That's under section 7 under general exemptions. But yes, it does apply to all new construction in the regional district.
Okay, but it doesn't apply to pre-existing
No, so it would be
buildings
new
or
construction,
sites.
correct? It would be new construction. It would apply to a pre-existing property, but not to existing buildings there. But let's say they were doing an addition or new construction, that would have to meet the bylaw.
Okay, and then just a supplementary. So for instance, the Nicola River, the channeling within the river is very, very dynamic right now. It's still trying to find its new path through the valley. So how often will this be updated?
Well, for the Nicola Valley specifically, BGC Consulting is working with the province to do brand new mapping as we speak, and they're expecting that in early next year. So we're waiting for that mapping, and when that comes in and we've reviewed it, then we'll bring that back to the board for consideration. So at this time, we're just proposing to take what's in the zoning bylaw already as a floodplain regulation and have this transfer into a new standalone bylaw. And so for the Nicola River specifically, it references the historic provincial maps. And so that will continue until we get the new data from BGC.
That's supplementary, but the river is just not, even when they bring those maps back, it's still going to be changing dynamically because the whole valley, the whole river valley hasn't settled at all. So how often are they going to be coming back?
It'll really depend on how often mapping is redone through that area. So that's something I think the BGC team is looking at with the province. Because you're right, I think with climate change and different factors, mapping can't remain static for 30, 40, 50 years the way it has in the past. But right now, the way our bylaw is written, we have to refer to some map. And so we'll utilize the new mapping, but how often it'll be refreshed, that'll partly be a question of whether the province will be supporting new mapping in the future as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, please. I think the whole, one of the main purposes of taking this portion out of the other bylaw and making it a standalone is to make it a more dynamic, more living document that is more capable of easily and quickly being updated to reflect changing circumstances, mapping, provincial regulations, et cetera.
That's correct, yes.
Any further comments or questions on the first recommendation? Oh, Director Getz.
Just to Director Beppel, the cold water change will be over a period of 6 to 7 years. There'll be Q200 levels, there'll be different levels up to 340 and back down again. So it's going to have to be a living document to encompass everything that's going to happen on the cold water for quite some time. We still haven't even had DMAP funding yet, so it's anybody's game right now. So the Nicola pretty much standard as it is right now. And we have asked for funding to help with that as well. But again, living document will have to carry that on for a while before and most of this mapping is going to be coulda, shoulda. So it's not going to reflect pretty much what we're doing right now.
Any further discussion on the first recommendation? Call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We have a second recommendation. Director Laird, seconded by Director Sarai. Thank you. Any discussion? On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And we have a third. Vice Chair Smith, thank you very much. Second by Director Houghton. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 8.4, if you will cast your mind back about 10 or 15 minutes to my description of last night's public hearing, the exact same comments refer to this item. So we had no members of the public here at the public hearing last night who evinced any interest in the Green Lake and Area OCP. I'm sure that is no personal slight to the Green Lake and Area OCP, which is an extremely important document, just not something that residents at Green Lake, who presumably were at Green Lake enjoying their cabins, were terribly interested in last night. So Ms. Sadilkova had prepared what I'm sure was a fine presentation that we never got to see. So we're going to show it to you right now. No, we're not. I'm just joking. So we have two recommendations here. Director O'Reilly, thank you very much. Director Thorpe, second. Do we have any discussion? Alternate Director Beppel?
Thanks. It was great to read about the riparian zone, area protection, environmentally sensitive development permit area, and the hazardous land development permit area. I'm just wondering, how often does the TNRD actually enforce on any of those in terms of the regulations that we've had in place to date? Will they actually have any impact if there's no enforcement?
So we did have a meeting at Green Lake, an information meeting, oh gosh, in March. And at that point, we looked at how many development permits we'd processed. And even just for the riparian area, which is the majority, we processed, I think, about 60 some. And so with those development permits, that means the historic septic fields that were off and, lake septic field cabin, they were moved back by the road. And there is water quality data of Green Lake going back when this OCP was first contemplated. And the Caribou is going to embark upon a water sampling and testing evaluation soon. They were already going to do it. We were hoping that we would have that data for now, but we don't. And we're hoping that will, so we don't have the data, but we know we've done the development permits and those septic fields have moved and the riparian areas have been protected. But really the rubber hits the road with the water quality data, which we will have in time.
Thank you. Any further questions? On recommendation one, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. We have a second recommendation. Director Ranta, seconded by Director Hayward. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 8.5, dangerous dog control bylaw number 2383. We have half a dozen recommendations here, which I understand we do need to tackle one at a time. So here we go. Director O'Reilly, thank you. Second, Director Lampro. Hey, is there any discussion on recommendation number one? Alternate Director Beppel?
Seems, well, I looked at the Caribou Regional District's bylaws and also the Fraser Valley Regional District bylaws, just to get a sense of where we're at. So the Caribou Regional District has a fine of $2,000 as opposed to our fine of $450. And the Fraser Valley has 2 levels of fines from $600 to $1,000. And one thing also is that I was, our fine is $450 for a dog that kills or seriously injures someone. Both of the other regional districts do not actually talk about the harm that's inflicted. They just penalize the dog. So their bylaws are written from the perspective of $1,000 or $2,000 for an aggressive dog, as opposed to ours that says $450 for a dog who kills or maims. I think that the way that those other 2 regional districts framed the fine was better. And personally, I think $450 is a pretty low fine to levy. So I'll leave it to the board in terms of that. But my concerns is just how we framed the fine, as it would, I think, be better to write it from the perspective of what the dog has done, as our colleague regional districts have done. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Mr. Vieira, do you like to speak to this?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So through the chair, some comments, and thank you for that, Director Beppel. I guess to tackle a couple things you said, around the way the offenses are written here. So the recommendation is around amending the bylaw to include these fines through the existing language that our dangerous dog control bylaw is written. So what you're suggesting, if we change the language of what the penalty is around, then we'd have to really take this back and rework our dangerous dog control bylaw. Comment about the value of the fines. I guess the first point, just to clarify for the whole board, we had 0 fines before. There was the only options we had within the existing bylaw was to seize and destroy the dog, or nothing. We'd issue a warning letter. So this is adding another tool to the toolbox. So it's not saying that this must be imposed or when and where it would be imposed, but this is a tool for our bylaw officers. Yeah, around the value of the fines, you know, we looked at regional districts where they were higher and lower, examples you brought up. But really the intent of this in practice is to use these fines when an incident is not so serious that we would go through with the seizure and destroy of dog. So it could be, instead of a warning letter, it might be a fine, and then it could escalate from there. So that was the rationale. Comments.
Supplemental?
So I would just say, you know, maybe we want to vote this in for now, but when it comes back a second time, it always comes back. So is to look at changing how we refer to the problem as framing it from the perspective of the dog, as opposed to what's happened to the person, I think would be, I would find more comfortable. And then also when it comes back, really consider whether the fine is punitive enough.
I don't personally think of fines as being punitive. I think of them more as being a deterrent, not a penalty, because ideally we wouldn't be making any money from bylaw fines at all. My view. All right, any further discussion on recommendation 1? Okay, on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. We have a second recommendation. Director Laird, thank you. Alternate Director O'Toole, give you your moment in the spotlight there. So any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Number 3. Recommendation 3. Director Getz, thank you. Director O'Toole. Director O'Toole seconds that one. Need to turn my microphone off when I'm prompting people. Any discussion on the question? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We're halfway there. Number 4. Move 4. Vice Chair Smith, seconded by Director Thorpe. Thank you. Any questions or comments? No, no hands in the air. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Recommendation 5. Director Newstater, second by Director Smith. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Recommendation number 6. Director Hall, thank you. Second by Director Middleton. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. You all sensed this was coming. We're going to take a 10 to 15-minute recess. If everyone could take their seats, please, we'll get this show back on the road. Thank you very much, everyone. Back to it. I understand that a couple of the people who are presenting at our closed session need to start close to 4 o'clock. Just something to bear in mind as we move on to item number 9.1, Agricultural Land Commission application on Trans-Canada Highway in Area I. And General Manager of Operations, Jamie Vieira, would just like to speak briefly to this item.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to bring to your attention the memo that's attached to the report. And if there's any questions around that, the memo was from the Manager of Solid Waste and Recycling, Adriana Mayu, just highlighting that the proposed operations is supported by the Regional Solid Waste Management Plan that was approved by this board, in that it does support the ability to have compost operations within the regional district. So currently we do not have any commercial compost operation anywhere near Kamloops, and that was an issue identified in the solid waste management plan. Having a compost operation nearby not only provides opportunity for municipal and even rural area collection of organic waste, but also commercial collection of that material. So for example, there's no large scale commercial organics collection of food scraps in Kamloops from businesses. I know the city of Kamloops is doing it for the residential side. And one of the main drivers, the reason they can't do collection for businesses is not lack of commercial trucks willing to do that. It's a lack of place to unload it, to process it. So that's why it was identified in the plan. I'll just leave it at that and open any questions on that aspect.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. We do have a staff recommendation. Director Houghton, seconded by Director Hayward. Thank you. Questions or comments? Director Thorpe first, and then Director Houghton. Director Thorpe?
Okay, thanks, Jamie. I appreciate the need for organic waste. I do question where this organic waste is going to come from. I read the amendments and I still have questions around the riparian area. And I have some serious questions around the engagement with the First Nations in the area with respect to the Maccabee fossil site. In particular, I recently spoke with one of the CAOs from a neighboring First Nations band, and from what I understand, there really hasn't been any engagement at this point, despite what the amended report says. So at this point, I would recommend against it personally. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Houghton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I took the onus to phone one of the neighboring landholders that surround this particular site about a week ago and asked him if he had any concerns. And he had two main concerns. I think one of them was what Director Thorpe reflected last meeting was the to date, all that material that's brought in, I don't believe any of it's gone back out. It's been used more of a landfill than it has been a composting site. And you had that big fire there a few years ago and they had to spread it all over that riparian area. But granted, I know things have changed. We got new owners and we're doing organic waste now, but he had two main concerns. And as long as those were addressed, he says, I have no problem. One being the seepage of the material into the groundwater for the wells that are surround that area, both to the east and both to the west. And also the bird situation with all the stuff that gets hauled in, if it's, you know, not covered properly and all these birds come and then they leave, well, then they end up over all the neighboring ranches and neighboring households. So those were his two main concerns. He said those two things can be addressed. I'd be in support of it. And I know we, you know, it's like when I proposed a transfer station in Knutsford. Everybody in Knutsford wanted a transfer station, but none of them wanted it in their back door. And we ended up putting it in our back door to solve a problem. So I think this will solve a problem within our general area. We need one as long as it's done right. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions on this item? Seeing none on the question, then all those in favor? And all those opposed? We have Director Getz, Director Thorpe. Opposed? That is carried. Move on to item 9.2, another ALC application, and we have another staff recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
Director Sarai, seconded by Director Newstader. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Any discussion on this particular item? No, on the question then, all those in favor and voting in favor, you will be recommending for refusal. So all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We have a verbal report from CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Just a few updates for the board today. Starting with emergency operations and preparedness. As you would have heard earlier today, and as you are most likely aware, the threat of wildfire continues to be a significant concern to our team. We're receiving situational reports on a daily basis right now that covers the entire province, which you would have received here probably from Deanna just this afternoon. Fortunately, our region as well as the Kamloops Fire Center is currently in decent shape for the time being. But with recent storms and convective weather, lightning strikes are very unpredictable. We are seeing huge uptick in fire activity all around us and continue to be prepared and vigilant to react as necessary. We continue to hear it's only a matter of time, which is quite scary as the conditions are extreme throughout the province and the region. And as you'll see in that report, just to highlight some of the highlights within there, there's 345 active fires in the province as of this morning, 392 fire starts in the last 7 days, of which 188 are out of control, 45 new fires in the last 24 hours, of which 37 are out of control, and we need to be prepared and ready. So the TNRD has been fortunate to date. The only one that we are aware of right now is the fire near Lillooet, the Casper Creek wildfire that's on our borders. So as with all fire information, things change quickly. We'll continue to send those reports out. But even last night, there were spot fires all around Kamloops, for example, that luckily we were able to react with, and BC Wildfire was all over those. We also continue to work on being proactive with our public messaging and a release that we sent out earlier this month regarding caution for boaters using the South Thompson River, the buoy system. For those that don't know, we operate that navigational system from west of Chase to Kamloops, and due to rivers being so low and near historic lows, it's just a warning for folks that we are certainly wanting people to be careful as they navigate through the South Thompson in this area. Moving on to a second topic, just about the Accessibility Advisory Committee. The accessibility survey is now live, and we'll encourage all residents to take a few minutes and complete the survey. The survey asks residents for their feedback about accessibility at the TNRD owned and operated facilities on the TNRD digital platforms and their general feedback on accessibility. It's available online. We have sent paper copies to all of our community libraries as well, and paper copies can be sent out upon request through our communication department. Residents can also request another way to participate if they need to through our communications department. We launched the survey on June 26th, and the deadline is for September 1st to be complete. The third topic was just our TNRD corporate operations plan. I wanted to just highlight that the senior management team are in the process of pulling together our corporate operational plans that closely align with the board's new strategic plan. How we plan and manage our workload is very important, and we want to ensure that we're being effective and efficient as possible. Our daily, weekly, and monthly workload needs to link directly to the strategic plan. and that the projects and initiatives and day-to-day operations are moving forward in a productive manner. As expected, our staffing levels and resources are closely linked to this as well. We will be providing status reports and regular updates with regards to the board with regards to our strategic plan quarterly. Again, and just making sure the board knows how we're performing against expectations. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. And then just a few other quick updates. UBCM preparation is well in the works. Chelsea is working hard pulling together our plans and potential meetings as requested by the board. We have made 9 minister meeting requests and 5 ministry staff meeting requests for the upcoming conference in September. These requests include a variety of topics and discussions that involve both the regional district and the hospital board. We've also included many of you to participate in these meetings, and we'll confirm that once these minister meetings and staff meetings are confirmed. Out of town board meeting is also coming up quite quickly, August 16th and 17th. Chelsea and our team are working hard to pull together all of the details and plans for another successful out of town board meeting. This year's 2-day event will include a tour of the North Thompson, with our official board meeting taking place in Blue River on the morning of August 17th. We have a number of important projects and capital investments in the North Thompson. I would like the board to experience and see these firsthand. A few examples on some of the work include the Latramule Park improvement project, the V&B Community Park ice rink replacement, the Blue River Suspension Bridge, additions to the Black Pool, the V&B, and the McClure Fire Hall, and then the upcoming Clearwater Library upgrades. So that'll be finalized here in the next few weeks, and we'll be on our way to a successful trip. And then just my final update is our renovations in this building are finally complete, and staff and departments have made that transition into their new spaces. Feel free to take a look at floors 3 and 4, and keep in mind that staff have moved around and changed, so people may not be where you expect them to be. Our EOC is also complete, just awaiting some technology and furniture, but I'm happy to say that we met our timeline and the project was on budget. And that's all I have. So back to you, Chair Roden.
Thank you very much, CEO Hildebrand. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Hildebrand? Director Middleton.
A really quick one, and perhaps just an email could be sent out about it if you could, for the out of town board meeting for locals that would like to leave a vehicle parked downtown before we get on the bus and for overnight. Is there a parking area? Can we use the parkade here for overnight parking, or is maybe even if you could just send out an email about it, just so.
I know Chelsea, thank you for the question. I know Chelsea's working on a solution for that one, and an email will follow on that one with some ideas. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Move on to CAO performance review. And just a note before we move the recommendations, hopefully, that the general manager of people and engagement will be reaching out to all directors regarding expressions of interest for this committee. So the members of this committee will not be appointed today, but you will be receiving an email. If you are interested, you can reply. So we do have 2 recommendations. Or sorry, 1. It's a joint. It's an omnibus recommendation. Director Laird, thank you. Director Grenier, second. Questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor, opposed if any, that is carried. Item 10.1.3, regional grants and sponsorships fall 2023 intake program deferral. Do you have a staff recommendation? Director Middleton, and seconded by Director O'Connor. Thank you, ladies. Any questions or comments? Alternate Director Beppel and then Director Morris.
Thank you. Through to staff, because you likely have some of the grants that come in yearly. Will it be a hardship for any groups that typically would have applied in September, and maybe their event is in September, October, and now we're not giving anything out until November? So I'm just wondering if it might be a hardship to any of the groups that normally get funding from us.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. We've made connection with all the groups that normally connect with us, and we didn't see or hear of any concerns whatsoever. And if you recall, and maybe you may not remember, but it's a $10,000 grant in aid. It's a very small one that we're going to redo and try to create a more robust grant and aid process. So we haven't heard any feedback, and we'll make sure we stay on top of that.
And Director Morris.
Thank you. My question was answered as well. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? On the question, then, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. 10.1.4 unsightly premises. Hills Frontage Road, electoral area I, 16 mile. Director Thorpe would like to make that motion, seconded by Director Getz. Thank you. Questions or comments? On the question, then, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. 10.1.5, Canada Community Building Fund in electoral area L, a new drilled well at the Pritchard Fire Hall. Director Houghton, seconded by Director Morris. Thank you. Any discussion on this item? Director Houghton and then Director Newstader.
Yeah, I just, $60,000 does sound like a lot of money. I just thought I'd ask Operations Manager Riera just to fill in what all that we're going to do with that and what it's going to cover and some of the contingencies that are included in that. It's not just a drilled well, and maybe a bit of the history. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Director Houghton. Yeah, so a bit of the history is that this well has been kind of on its last legs for a number of years, and we've had recased it, re-drilled it a few times. But ultimately, we're at the point now where we're literally running out of water. The $60,000 is based on a quote from the agency who's done the previous work on the well, and it includes both drilling the well as well as all the connections required to reconnect it to the hall, as well as the contingency built in, because as many of you I'm sure are aware that drilling a well is risky business, and we're fairly confident that there's water there, but we want to make sure there's an adequate fund allocated to it, so we don't have to come back to the board again to ask for additional funds.
Thank you, Director Newstader.
Thank you through the chair, and this is for staff. I'm supportive of this. I think it's a perfect use for the funds, and so I will be supporting this. But I'm just curious, and I may have to apologize because I lost the thread on it. But I'm curious about kind of the status of the Canada Community Building Fund, what our total allocation is, where that balance is at, and sort of the plan for how we use those dollars. Because this kind of looks first come, first serve, as opposed to divvying up the pie and allocating per region, you know, that kind of a thing. So wonder if you can just give us a really high level flyover of the use of the funds, the balance of the funds.
Thank you.
I guess I could start by answering that question through the chair, is that the Canada Community Building Fund is allocated as per the TNRD policy by electoral area, and that's population based. And the recent policy changes didn't change the allocation, but it tightened up the regulation around, or the policy around how what projects were permitted under that policy. And I'll turn it over to CA Hildebrandt.
Thank you. If I could add, Director Newstader, are you maybe thinking about the new investment, the $5.4 million growing? No, you're talking about this one. So it did, to Jamie's point, it stayed exactly the same. It's just the criteria is much different on how it can be accessed with the applications.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Any further questions or comments? On the question, then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. That is carried. 10.1.6 Pritchard will stay in Pritchard and look at their water and wastewater treatment plants. But before we do that, well, we're going to do that via the General Manager of Operations, who has a short presentation for us.
Thank you, Chair. So I will keep this brief, but I wanted to just highlight a few of the points that are in the report around this recommendation. And so I guess to summarize the three recommendations, the key component here is that we're recommending that we allocate $2.1 million of the $5.4 million Growing Communities Fund. And yes, there's a lot of funds with the name community in it, so it's very confusing, at least I find it confusing. So this is not the gas tax fund, which is the Canada Community Building Fund. This is the Growing Communities Fund, which was the one-time grant of $5.4 million from the provincial government that we received just earlier this year. So to reiterate, the recommendation is that 2.1 million of that 5.4 get allocated to this single project in the community of Pritchard that would result in both a new water treatment plant and a new wastewater plant, both in that same community. So this is following the previous approved or board motion of the last meeting that the board allocate that funding of the Growing Communities Fund to TNRD's core infrastructure, with a portion of being allocated and used to support utility services capital plan. Now, in discussion leading up to this with some board members and staff internally, what we were considering and a question we were anticipating is, well, why Pritchard? I'll be the first to admit and tell the board that there's many other capital projects, even specifically within the utility side of our other 12 system that also have urgent capital needs. So why are we recommending Pritchard? And I'll tell that in 5 different points. First one is that Pritchard is one of the largest systems that the TNRD operates, serving over 500 residents. We have some systems that are as small as 16 connections, so servicing 30 to 40 residents. So this is one of the larger ones. In Pritchard, we also operate both the water system and the wastewater system, which is unique. We don't have, the only other wastewater system we operate is in Paul Lake, and there's the water system there is not operated by us. So this is the only place where we could take advantage of, and what we're proposing here, the efficiencies of having 2 projects done in one procurement and contract process, replacing both of these systems at once. And number 3, that these both the water treatment plant and the wastewater plant are high priorities projects, and that if not completed, will create ongoing risks to the TNRD. So what do I mean by that? Well, this is our water intake at Pritchard, our pump house there. So this system is similar to a lot of our surface water systems. We are drawing water directly out of the South Thompson River, adding chlorination, treating it just through chlorination process, where it goes into a reservoir and back gravity fed into the system to our customers. So what that means is there's no other treatment process, no filtration process. So when we have high turbidity in the river, which is a common occurrence, it drives water quality advisories or boil water notices on a very, very regular basis. Over the past 3 years, this community was under either a boil water notice or a water quality advisory, a total of 422 days. In 2022 alone, it was under a boil water notice or water quality advisory 202 days. So a water filtration plant will virtually eliminate these notices and dramatically improve water coming out of the taps. Moving on to the wastewater plant, this is of equal urgency as it's at the end of its life. There's ongoing operational challenges with this facility that are resulting in the TNRD regularly being out of compliance with our operating permit with the Ministry of Environment. So what this means is that at times the effluent that we discharge into the environment exceeds the allowable limits of the permit. This is not a secret to the MOE. They are well aware of this and have issued us a warning letter last year. Now the next steps that they have towards us are to start issuing fines, as well as can order us to improve the system. So it's not necessarily I guess this is a long way of saying it's not even a choice whether or not we upgrade the system. The choice is where do we find money to fund it? And up until this funding becoming available, we didn't have a mechanism for that. And that's why this hasn't moved forward yet. Number four, and I think this is the key piece, is that 75% of the funding required for this project is already available. So the recommendation to utilize the Growing Communities Fund represents only 25% of the total project costs. So these are the tables breaking down the two projects that we're proposing to combine into one, the wastewater and the water plant. These tables are in your report, but I'll skip ahead to this summary table that combines it. So getting both these projects done at once requires a total budget of 8.3 million. We already have secured 4.95 million through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Grant that we received in 2020 that was directly devoted to this project. So it can only be used for this project. One of the recommendations here is to allocate the Canada Community Building Fund, the gas tax that's allocated to this electoral area to this project. And Director Morris is proposing and supporting allocating all of the funds currently allocated to her area, as well as the funds that are going to be received this year towards this project. And then there's 545,000 in reserve funds through both of these utility systems that will fully drain and utilize towards this project. So that leaves the $2.1 million that we're recommending utilizing the Growing Communities Fund. And finally, upgrades to this Pritchard system after this is complete will be done, which means we can move on to focus on other utility systems and other needs. And part of what that means, not only is that freeing up staff time and resources to work on the other systems, but it also means that when new grant opportunities come available, then these two projects would be off that list and we can focus on other systems in terms of prioritizing the grant opportunities. And I will leave it at that. And Manager of Utilities, Tyrone McCabe's also here to answer any questions that may stump me.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Vieira. So we do have three recommendations. Director Morris moves recommendation 1, seconded by Director Houghton. Thank you. Discussion or questions or comments. I'm easy. Don't take that the wrong way. I just suddenly realized what I said. I'm flexible. I don't know if that's any better. I'll just stop digging now. Yes, thank you, Director Sarai, for that good advice. Any questions or comments on this? No. On the question then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We have a second recommendation.
Recommendation 2.
Director Sarai. Director Hall seconds that. Thank you very much. Questions or comments? None? On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And we have a third and final recommendation here. All right, Director O'Reilly, seconded by Director Ranta. Any questions or comments? Director Houghton.
I'd just like to thank the staff for working closely with Director Morris. I know Director Morris has put a lot of work and time, as you folks have. I know this has been a prevailing issue. This isn't this whole deal here is not on a want basis, it's on a need basis. And I'd like to thank the director of the area and the staff for a lot of hard work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Houghton, and thank you to staff and Director Morris. Director
I
Morris.
can just add one comment. My special thanks to the staff in particular. I was maneuvering an area that I'm not completely familiar with, not surprisingly. So thank you very much for your support in letting us move forward on a truly significant investment for our residents.
Any further questions? On the question then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Item 10.1.7, we have infrastructure planning grant proposed application. We have two recommendations. Director Laird, thank you. Seconded by Director Ranta. Discussion? All right, all on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Recommendation number 2. Director Jim Smith, thank you. Seconded by Director Ranta. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. For information, we have the TNRD building permit activity highlights. Does anyone have any questions on that? Committees, we have a few recommendations that came out of the policy committee meeting. We have recommendation 1, Board of Directors Code of Conduct. Moved by Director Thorpe. Seconded by Director Laird. Any questions or discussion on this? On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Recommendation 2, repealing the Community Assistance Fund. Director Thorpe, thank you very much. Seconded by Director Laird, thank you. Discussion on this? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Third recommendation for policy regarding dangerous dog control policy. Director Thorpe, again, Director Houghton seconds that. Thank you kindly. Discussion on this. On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Committee of the whole, we have 4 recommendations. Director Laird, seconded by Director O'Toole. Thank you. Any discussion on recommendation number 1? Seeing no hands in the air on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Recommendation 2. Director O'Reilly and seconded by Director Jim Smith. Any discussion on recommendation number 2? On the question then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Recommendation number 3. Director Sarai, seconded by Director O'Toole. Any discussion? Questions, comments? On the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That one is carried. And recommendation number 4. That was Director Newstader. Thank you. Seconded by Director Hall. Questions or comments? All right, on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We have the minutes from the Thompson Regional Hospital District meeting of June 16th for information. Any questions or comments on that? No, do we have any new business from members? Director Grenier and Director Houghton. Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick note. I attended a Lac Lejeune Fire Smart meeting. It was a request of the community. And one of our new staff, Dan Funk, made a presentation right on the fly, and it was excellent. And I would say to directors, we've got a great resource there, great ideas and initial feedback so that you can roll out the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Houghton.
Just a few updates in Area L. I know I reported last time that I worked with the Ministry of Transportation, Highways and Argo Road Maintenance, trying to get a couple of pieces of subdivision road paved, one in Del Oro and one on Ferry Road. I'd like to report that those have all been done. And as a newbie director, it kind of makes you feel good when you work with some folks you might not be totally acquainted with, but you get a job done, and that both those roads have been in rough shape for a lot of years. And then this weekend I attended the Pritchard Rodeo on behalf of the TNRD. I did give them some discretionary funding to help put it on. And it was a well put on rodeo. Thanks should go out to the Pritchard Community Association. They put brand new footing in the arena and it was awesome. And they've done a lot of work on the infrastructure to house the people attending and plus to make it cleaner and prettier. So hats off to Pritchard. And that's a report from Ariel. Thank you.
Pritchard is clearly where everything is happening right now, so advise we all go to Pritchard. All right, we move on to question period. Are there any oh, no, Director Hayward, sorry.
I just wanted to say that last weekend we had the Canadian Classic National Sheep Show in Barrier. And we had sheep from Quebec and Ontario and all across Canada that came to our show. So that's amazing. And they come to the show, they show them, and then they have a big auction sale at the end. So we ended up with BC sheep going back to Quebec and Ontario and Quebec sheep coming to BC. And that's an amazing idea. And they can't come back for 9 years. That's the way their ruling is. So we've got lots of time to get ready for them again. Thank you.
Great facility.
Director Sarai is pointing out that these multicultural sheep are a microcosm of our great country. So thank you very much for that. All right, do we have any questions? Anyone in Zoom land out there who has questions? All right, then I would move that a closed meeting take place following this meeting in accordance with Community Charter Sections S91G, potential legal action, 91D, the security of the property of the regional district, 91G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the regional district, and 91K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal or regional district service. Someone like to second that? Director Rancher, thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? We will have a 5-minute recess and then move into closed session.